And I'm starting to see it show up on labels, regenerative ag. Just like 10 years ago, I told my wife, you'll start to see A2 genetics start to appear in dairy. And sure enough, I mean, there's A2 milk on the shelves now. And this type of thing is growing. And these big companies, they're invested in it because they know it's the next big wave. They're not stupid. They know you can only dump billions of pounds of glyphosate, have GMO seeds where you eliminate diversity. They know you can only do it for a few decades before the soil is completely degraded.
Yeah, growing indoors is great, but you can only grow lettuces. I don't see anybody putting a wheat field in their front room with LED lights. That's just not realistic. Is 2022 the year we see capital rotation out of risk assets like crypto and stocks, jumping into safe haven assets like gold? Gold investors haven't been losing sleep over the stock market's taper tantrum, with Blackstone warning of a lost decade, quote unquote, where stock market returns are anemic. We have Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo all forecasting gold over $2,000 an ounce in 2022, and Bloomberg says there's the potential for $3,000 per ounce on their price targets. Learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video. Had so much positive feedback last time Keith Snow and myself talked. Food prices continuing, inflation not being transitory. A lot of things disappearing out of, let's say, the shelves that we're seeing across supermarkets. Just our availability for foods is going to, change a little bit. So Keith running foodstoragefeast.com. We're going to talk about that today as well. The above ground crops are going to have more difficulty with the hail, the wind, the freezes, but below ground tuber type crops definitely are going to be the staple. I mean, they're still staples across an enormous amount of the world, from cassava to taro to the potatoes, and it keeps going on down the list there. So Keith, I appreciate you joining me today. I know there's a lot to talk about.
Go and buy something, and do you do Venmo? Sure, you send somebody a Venmo payment. Now this year, those people are going to start reporting that. All that stuff is going to be reported. So it's harder and harder to use the online tools. And like you mentioned, farmers market. Okay, all of a sudden, if you bring up, and when we had things called tailgate markets, and it was just trucks that would pull up, they'd back up their pickup truck, and they'd have, corn or honey or tomatoes, and they had a table, and you bought it from them. Eventually, those people are going to have a business license to transact. And then, from there, eventually the dollar will go away. And I think it's all headed there, and it's scary to think about. But this is what's happening around us. And this is why, we need to start paying attention to what is really important.
But the way that it's being set up right now, digital currencies, and that's the way the Fed coin on the digital space, this programmable money, will be out next year too, in 2023. So it seems like they're getting everybody ID.me to get ready for the unveiling of the Fed coin, which is a central bank digital currency, which pings right back to where you said cash is going to go away. So every dollar will know where it's going to be spent. Now, your access to these digital dollars are going to be required for this ID.me facial recognition thing. And then in addition, what else? Because it's not going to stop there. Because if they have all the money, then they really control you. If you have no ability to grow your own food or buy it in a supermarket because you're not on the system, then what? Then what, really?
Yeah, well, again, I think a lot of people always say, oh, we're America. This could never happen here.
Oh, it is happening.
Yeah, do a little research into China's social credit score and see how tightly they control everything there. It's very tightly controlled. Oh, it'll never happen here. It is happening here. And all those little things like you just described are going to get more and more. But what I hope and what I see as a potential, again, the great realignment that's happening in the country, people are moving to freer states. At some point, they're just going to, the politics in this country are a complete and utter joke. So the left, the right, they're all, it's all theater. So at some point, I think the states, again, going back to my description of some of the Russian states, some of those breakaway states, I do believe that will happen here, and that new countries will be formed inside this country. And I believe it's this oppression and tyranny that they're really, the screws being tightened to where you can't buy something without showing proof of this or that. The more they do that, the more alignment is going to happen, and people are going to be moving to freer states. And eventually, I do believe that the country that we know might wind up being individual countries, and those great big powers that exert all these forces won't be able to do it anymore. I mean, you just take property tax for an example. I mean, that was never something that I don't even think that's in the Constitution as possible. But lots of things aren't in the Constitution, but you have regulations, laws. I mean, just go and try and buy a personal protection item in Massachusetts, for instance, or, to carry one. I mean, the hoops you would have to jump through are crazy. So I do think at some point, this country will sadly break into pieces, and a lot of the overlords would be tossed to the side. Now, that's an ugly process. But I do think if this keeps up the way it's heading, that's a possibility. It's a very dark thought, but yeah.
Yeah, Texas had been floating the idea as well. And, if you look at the balkanization of those countries post-Russia, what we understand, Soviet Union, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, which broke into Slovenia, and Czech Republic. I mean, just go down that whole line there, and then you get over to Georgia and Armenia, Azerbaijan area. Those are all independents now, but they still rely on the great power because they didn't have anything that set them aside as a producer of energies. Well, I mean, if you're in the Caspian Sea basin there with Azerbaijan, of course, but to refine that into the fertilizers, to bring in the machinery for farming and that sort of thing, that all came from another, what you consider superpower that had this massive manufacturing. I mean, inside Lithuania or Latvia, how many factories making massive farm machinery and generators and transformers do you think there are in Latvia? There aren't. They rely so heavily on imports from so many other things just to keep their dailies going, imports of food. They don't grow enough to even feed their entire population. And think about these things that we can't grow, but we need to manufacture. Steel smelting, steel, cold rolled steel, carbon fiber. That's not coming from Latvia. That's coming from somewhere else, United States, China, Russia. You got to get into these heavier kind of industrialized nations to give the world the things they need to continue forward with civilization. Yeah, growing indoors is great, but you can only grow lettuces. I don't see anybody putting a wheat field in their front room with LED lights. That's just not realistic. So moving forward, a few of these challenges of being able to grow food outdoors, sure, but we lost all the blooms off our trees for the fruit this year. It froze super late, all the way in late April when everything had budded out already and it had bloomed out. So where does that take us? Can we protect ourselves? Yeah, we're going to be super reliant on a lot of other things. So breaking down, if the state's balkanized, it would probably be the Southeast US. There's ports, there's manufacturing. Look at all the automobile manufacturing here. There's steel smelt. There's all kind of aluminum fabrication, aluminum smelting. There's a huge amount of stuff in the Southeast US. Texas as well. They could supply the energy, but then when you get up into, the flyover states, if you will, the Corn Belt and that sort of thing out in Kansas, they got food. So what is it going to be? The whole Midwest grow belt becomes its own area, but they're the major food producer. Southeast US has the ports, food. Texas has energy. And then desert states, what's going to happen with them? If it's going to balkanize out, it'll be a tumultuous process. But I think if we look at the FEMA maps, I think zones 1 through 7 1 through 9. Those might be a good indication of somebody's already mapped this out. That's why they set the FEMA zones as such. Just saying, just saying.
Oftentimes I wish I didn't know what I know, and I'm sure you're feeling the same, that you don't wish you knew the things that you knew sometimes, because yeah, I mean, if you're looking at your screen, it's a perfect little world on TikTok and Instagram, of course, but the reality is it's definitely, things are changing. And yeah, those are very good points about, is a place sustainable? Now I would say, Iowa, for instance, how many acres of the soy and corn there is grown using regenerative principles? Probably less than 2%.
Oh, way less, probably 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah, so they're all completely relying on the inputs. Those are all big, giant global companies. So those people don't have much, it all has to work well for it to work well. And when it starts to not work well, it's scary. And yeah, these are dark topics. And again, that's why who knows what's going to happen, but I do know people need to try and build as much security into their life as they can. There's ways to do it. We've touched on quite a few of them, but also, yeah, certain places are better places than others. Like big cities are not great places to be. And I think, as more and more people realize that, yeah, a lot more people are going to move out into the country. I mean, I just did an audio show. I talked about, there were 2 topics. Is this the end of chemical agriculture? Seeing how much, and I can't remember the number, but it's a great number, the amount of phosphate that we have to import from China. And they stopped all their phosphate exports, I think last October, or something around there. We're not independent with phosphate. So, there's a couple of states, Florida being the number 1, where the phosphate comes to make the fertilizer to keep Iowa running. So Iowa, I mean, they're, places like that, they definitely don't have much security if this keeps going. And smarter governments are, and you've been talking about this, they've been stopping exports. The smart countries don't export their food when we're in the middle of a crisis, or the ones that are really looking out for the people don't. I don't think for a minute that the people that run our country don't understand that these things are happening, but they see it as a tool. But with that much dependence on fertilizer, it's a tough place to be. And I think, one answer to the chemical thing and chemical agriculture thing is regenerative practices. Now that it takes a couple of years to do it, but the soil is everything. And if you don't have healthy soil, I mean, throughout millennia, the societies that degraded their soils don't exist. And we're seeing that right now, where think about this great experiment of chemical agriculture started, let's say around the 50s. NPK, what a wonderful thing. And then you went from NPK and row crops into genetically modified, and the people were promised a world. The yields are so much higher, the inputs are less, but you got the opposite. And in addition to getting the opposite, you also became completely reliant on government subsidies and seeds and chemicals that come from a few different companies. So you got the opposite. It's just like the Affordable Care Act. Whatever they named something, just assume it's the opposite. It wasn't affordable. Just like the Patriot Act wasn't very patriotic. These things all tied together. But regenerative agriculture is something that I'm very excited about. I think it offers a lot of promise. And if you can, graze animals and move them often on land, and then, keep things growing in the soil at all times, don't till the soil, eliminate the use of pesticides and all that. Yeah, if you're a big farm that's doing row crops in the way I described earlier, yeah, you're going to have a suffering point. But the farms that have realized, and a lot more will realize it this year, it's just untenable to pay these type of input costs. So they're going to be forced to either say, screw it and sell it to a real estate developer, or to adopt other practices. And there are a lot of people out there promoting regenerative ag and permaculture, and these things can offer, we talked about a lot of things on here that if everyone is watching this entire interview, I mean, they may want to throw their hands up and say, oh crap, it's grim, but there are things happening, and regenerative ag is one of them. And don't think for a moment that those big ag companies don't understand that that's happening. Now, a lot of times, just like, banks will, or governments will, want to have a war, but they sell the war equipment at the same time. They usually are straddling both sides of the fence. So these chemical and giant food companies, they're selling the chemicals, they're selling the GMO seeds, they're doing all that, but they're also investing hundreds of millions of dollars into regenerative agriculture. So if you farm your land regeneratively, there's bonuses, things that you can get, and they know it's really the new organic. So in 10 years, and I'm starting to see it show up on labels, regenerative ag. Just like 10 years ago, I told my wife, you'll start to see A2 genetics start to appear in dairy. And sure enough, there's A2 milk on the shelves now. And this type of thing is growing. And these big companies, they're invested in it because they know it's the next big wave. They're not stupid. They know you can only dump billions of pounds of glyphosate, have GMO seeds where you eliminate diversity. They know you can only do it for a few decades before the soil is completely degraded and the stuff hits the fan. So people are looking to regenerative ag, and there's people that I follow on the internet. It's amazing the results when you transfer from a row crop input intensive farm to a no drill operation and you incorporate regenerative principles. You can build soil. You can build soil life, soil diversity. And if you have healthy soil and you have animals on that soil, you have wealth because those animals reproduce. Every time a cow has a heifer calf or a bull calf, you've just made money, and you already own the other one. So it builds. It's like compounding interest. And those type of things, any kind of animal, sheep, goats, like you mentioned earlier, when those are running on a system that is improving soil, those animals are being intensively managed, not just thrown out on a field and letting them wreck the field and then having to throw hay over the fence, but by moving them and letting them build soil with the hoof action, with the nibbling action, with their manure, and moving them off, just like Joel Salatin and these.
Joel Salatin, great example. I'm going to go to try to visit him. He's about 3 hours from here at Polyface Farms.
Yeah, this is the future. And ultimately, you and I have talked. I've been over to your state and I look every day at land. That's what I would like to do in the not too distant future, is to be on a piece of property. I'd like to graze cattle and have chickens and ducks and things like that, and be healing a piece of property and making that thing have excellent soil and therefore producing excellent quality products, because as things happen the way we described earlier, those people are going to be looking for people that are doing the things like I just described. Do you think somebody that has a regenerative farm like Brown's Ranch in North Dakota, do you think they have any trouble selling their beef, eggs, or pork or chicken? No, they have regular customers. And to answer your question about, farm markets being stopped and all that, they go and they have drops. So people will meet the truck and they'll buy those, and they order it ahead of time. They pay ahead of time. Again, part of that is in the system, whatever finance and applications that are online to take the payments. But the bigger point is that the farmer is bringing the goods right from the healthy soil, and they have drops and people are getting the foods they need. And that's where I see the future. That's what I think will happen. And that's a future I want to be a part of.
Yeah, and we'll have to protect that too. Now, let me add into compost here. I have a personal story. So I ended up connecting with Monterey Mushroom, and I have a driver with he has a pretty good sized dump truck, comes in, he can carry 20 cubic yards max fill. So ended up getting 60 cubic yards of mushroom compost. But at the same time, I was interested in getting a few other types of compost to mix it up to have a real natural fertilized compost. So chicken manure and cow manures mixed in with that. But the driver who I use has also been looking for some of this stuff because he has a farm as well. It's nigh impossible. The only reason I was able to get the compost is because I have a registered farm. And Monterey Mushroom, wherever it is, they have facilities everywhere in all 50 states, lots of them around. They will only deal with registered farms that are taking 10 cubic yards or more. They will not facilitate a small trailer, some sort of pickup truck coming in. No, you bring in a rig and you pick it up, and that's all they want to deliver with. And so it's coming down to getting horse manure mixed with hay. And one time per month, maybe a load of 6 or 5 cubic yards of chicken dung. That's it. That's all that's left. And the amazing point about this is I was asking, driver that helps me, can we get more next month in February? Can we get like one, a couple deliveries per month through the season? Because we're going to use that to, compost all the 100 and some fruit trees, to set up a whole new garden area, thicken the soils and do all this. He's like, no. After January, at the end here, the 31st, everything's been forward bought by a single buyer for all mushroom compost coming out of the several Monterey mushroom facilities here in East Tennessee. All of it's been forward bought. There's not a single kilogram available for anybody from the public because it's all been bought. Now, who has that kind of money to rock in and say, we're going to take 500,000 tons of compost from the mushroom logs out of these 5 facilities for the rest of the year? Who's got that kind of money to plunk that down and get the guaranteed delivery? Who's got that kind of transport that can come in with their either dump trucks or trailers to come in and completely clean that place out day after day, after month, after month, after month? That is a massive buyer. You're talking about millions, 500,000 tons of compost coming out. Where do you put that? Somebody's getting ready to start fertilizing their fields again with compost, going away from the chemical ag, guaranteed. But who is it with that level of buy power? And I don't know. But that's kind of what's happening here on this side. Luckily, I got 60 cubic yards of the mushroom compost. That's enough to start. But I would sure love to get a few other natural ingredients to mix in there to, make that such a more viable mixture. We got the mycorrhiza and the kelp and all that, but to throw the chicken dung and then throw the horse manure in there mixed with the straw, that's already been horses are messy eaters. You got to clean them out, to clean the stalls all the time. So to have all that as a mix, that would be the perfect soil builder. And then I could probably buy some soil builder, which is basically wood dust. Oh, and another thing, you could go to a sawmill and ask them to load your truck. And then you could make, you're going to play chemistry set out in the fields, but it's not really bad. Well, you can try some different mixes of, say, 70% compost with a soil builder, 25%, and then mix in a couple 0.5% of whatever. And you start mixing and matching until you get the right consistency that'll build your soil, provide the nutrients, and give those plants somewhere that they love to live. And hay bale gardening, there's all these new techniques and things to try this year. But getting compost to be able to go on an organic to build your own soil, you're probably going to have to move down to the Jadam method here out of Korea to start from scratch. Because what I am talking about, if you are not a registered farm, I'm sorry, it is too late now. They have crossed that Rubicon where you're a registered business farm, you present your card at purchase, or you don't get it, period. And that's the way it's already in Tennessee. So I can imagine it's far more strict in places like California, upper New England states areas. So how would people, again, back to the Victory Garden, okay, every family across the United States starts to grow food in their backyard. How do they start it up? The fertilizer will not be what they thought it would be. It's going to be incredibly expensive out of Home Depot or Lowe's, probably 5 to 8 more times expensive than it is now. And then how do they start to build their own soils as a garden when they strip off the grass? It's hard clay. Year 1, minute 1, they just think you put a seed in it and it's going to grow. It's not like that. So A, the learning curve, but B, for the average family, just the neighborhood, how do you get those implements into the family neighborhood if there's not that kind of compost and things available that there were in generations or years past? I see the huge disconnect happening right here. I love what you're talking about. I'm putting it in practice, but an enormous amount of other people cannot, because where are they going to get the inputs from?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I've read articles and saw that because of the shortage of fertilizer, what are farmers going to do? So people are going to turn, to manure, but there's not enough manure. So then you're kind of like stepping yourself down. But for you and I, number one, again, going back to what I always preach, make sure you have a good stock of food. Next up, make sure you have seeds. Everybody should have a seed bank. Now, I buy seeds all the time. I've got a really large seed bank. So make sure you have a seed bank. And then as you go from there and you should all have a garden this year, whether it be potted plants and herbs, but some kind of garden. So how do you get the amendments? Now, I'm going to tell you something, and this is a permaculture principle, which is in a properly functioning system, and I'm not an expert by any means in permaculture. I am a newbie beginner. Same thing with regenerative ag, but every waste is used for something else. Now, a great example here where we live, there's a lawn service that comes and they cut the grass every Wednesday. And that, of course, it gets bagged up in their mowers and then they leave. So I started asking them I just put a bucket out and I wanted them to give me a bucket full of grass clippings. Now I tossed the guy a couple of jars of free spices because I like to trade just to get them, my dad used to do that years ago when we had garbage men in New Jersey. He would give them beer and whatever, and they would always take a little extra stuff away. But these guys would start leaving the grass for me. So, and I was doing tests, like I have a lot of container plants because you're not allowed to plant into the garden where I'm at here. into the dirt.
You own your house. It's totally yours. Freedom, freest country in the world.
Yeah. There's 3 evil letters, HOA. Yeah.
Oh,
so you can
homeowners association.
Yeah, homeowners association. But I noticed in my potted plants, the ones where the seeds, they were planted at the same time, same crop, same soil, same light exposure, everything. If I put grass clippings on top of the soil, those plants did far better. Like I couldn't believe it. And it's amazing what's happening. And again, this is a regenerative ag. This is a permaculture principle. It's using a waste stream from one thing to help another operation or another process without having to pay for the input. So the grass, you put the grass on there, it does many things. Number one, it covers the soil. Soil does not want to be bare. That's why all the farmers in the Midwest that do row crops have to buy glyphosate, because in between those rows, weeds are going to come up. Nature wants to cover itself. But when you have this grass covering the soil, number one, the soil doesn't warm up as fast, so it doesn't dry out. And number two, the grass clippings will rot, and it does smell terrible. Rotted grass is nasty, but it rots and it feeds microbes into the soil. So it's like free fertilizer, and it doesn't last forever. Every 2 weeks, I'll put another layer and keep piling up. It just keeps rotting down in there. But as that happens, the quality of the soil gets higher and higher. So that is really great. And it's using a free resource to help another resource or another plant growing. And that's the way we need to start thinking, like you're doing. How do we need to, you're buying some of this stuff, but we need to think about how we can create some of it from things we already have. Like if you live in an area that has deciduous trees, like Tennessee, for instance, the amount of leaves that fall down, that's amazing free resources, and we need to start thinking like that. So you take those leaves, and a lot of times maybe there's somebody that doesn't want the leaves, like an older person, whatever, they don't want leaves. But if you save those leaves, those are nutrients. What about if you live in an area, again, with a lot of above ground power lines and a lot of big trees, you're constantly going to have tree services and utilities chipping up those branches because they want to keep those free. That they have so much of that stuff, they don't know what to do with it. So again, make relationships with these people. Find out how you let them know, hey, you're in my neighborhood. You can come over at any time and dump that truck of mulch or wood chips or whatever it is. So it's wood chips, it's branches, leaves all ground up. That's the best quality stuff.